the silent architect. I thought I'd heard it all after 41 years of marriage. But when my son Derek stood in my living room last September and said, "Dad, we think you should sell the house and move into assisted living," I felt something inside me go numb and cold, like frostbite creeping through my chest. "What are you talking about?" I asked, setting down the blueprints I'd been reviewing. I'm 68, not 88. My daughter Linda was there too, sitting on the couch with that concerned expression I've been seeing more often lately. "Dad," she said gently, "you're living alone in this big house. Mom's been gone 3 years. You barely leave except for groceries. We're worried about you." "Worried about what?" Derek exchanged a glance with Linda. That look, the one that said they'd already discussed this, already made decisions about my life without including me in the conversation. "You're isolated," Derek said. "You spend all your time in the basement working on," he gestured vaguely, "whatever it is you do down there. It's not healthy. You need to be around people, have activities, social engagement. I work on architecture projects. That's what I do. That's what I've always done." Linda leaned forward. "Dad, you've been retired for 5 years. You're not working on real projects. You're just," she paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound cruel. "You're just keeping yourself busy with things that don't matter anymore. Things that don't matter." Those words sat in the air like smoke from a fire that was slowly consuming everything I had built my life around. I'd been a residential architect for 43 years in Calgary, started my own firm in 1985, built it from nothing into something respectable. I designed over 300 homes, 2 small commercial buildings, and a community center that won a regional design award. Nothing spectacular, nothing that would make architectural magazines, but solid work, work I was proud of. Then came the housing market crash in 2015, followed by the pandemic, followed by my wife Catherine's diagnosis with pancreatic cancer in 2020. She died in 2022, and by then my firm had dwindled to just me and one junior architect who left 6 months after Catherine passed. I closed the firm in 2023. Retired, they called it. But architects don't really retire. We just stop having clients. The kids have been supportive during Catherine's illness. They'd visited regularly, helped with appointments, sat with us during the hard conversations. But after she died, something changed. They started treating me differently, not like their father, but like a project that needed managing. "Dad, you're not eating properly," Linda would say, inspecting my refrigerator like a health inspector. "Dad, when's the last time you saw your friends?" Derek would ask, as if friendship were a prescription that needed refilling. "Dad, you need to get out more, join a club, take a class, do something besides sit in that basement." What they didn't understand, what they didn't care to understand, was that the basement was the only place I felt like myself anymore. The only place where I was still Victor Kozlov, architect, not just Victor Kozlov, widower who needed supervision. After that conversation about assisted living, I stopped answering their calls as frequently, not out of anger, but out of something more complicated. Disappointment maybe, or the realization that my children saw me as someone whose meaningful life had ended, someone who was now just marking time until death. I spent more time in my basement workshop, not just to avoid them, but because I was working on something real, something that mattered, at least to me. It had started small, almost accidentally. About 8 months after Catherine died, I was cleaning out her things and found a folder of old sketches I'd made back in the 1990s. Designs for modular housing systems, affordable, efficient, beautiful homes that could be constructed quickly and adapted to different family needs. I'd pitched the concept to developers back then. They'd all said the same thing. Interesting, but not practical. The construction industry was too traditional, too resistant to change. Stick with what works. Victor, design nice houses for nice families. Don't try to revolutionize anything. So I'd set it aside and done exactly that. Spent 30 years designing nice houses for nice families. But looking at those sketches again, I realized something. The world had changed. Climate concerns, housing affordability crises, supply chain innovations, new materials. 3D printing technology, modular construction becoming mainstream. Everything that had made my idea impractical in 1995 had shifted. The idea wasn't outdated. It was ahead of its time. And maybe, just maybe, its time had finally come. I started working on it. Not as therapy, not as a hobby, but as serious work. I updated the designs, incorporated new technologies, researched modern building codes and sustainable materials. I taught myself 3D modeling software, programs that hadn't existed when I first sketched these ideas on paper. The kids noticed I was spending more time in the basement, but they assumed I was just hiding from grief, avoiding life. They didn't ask what I was working on. They'd stopped asking about my work years ago, long before I retired. To them, architecture was just my job, not my passion. They never understood the difference. By the time Derek and Linda suggested assisted living, I had completed designs for 12 different modular home configurations. I had cost analyses, sustainability reports, construction timelines, and market research. I had something real, but I didn't tell them. What would be the point? They'd already decided I was someone whose productive years were behind him. 2 weeks after that conversation, I got a call from James Morrison, an old colleague who'd moved to Vancouver to work with a sustainable development company called GreenBuild Solutions. We'd stayed in touch sporadically over the years, mostly Christmas cards and occasional emails. Victor, he said, I'm in Calgary next week for a conference. Want to grab dinner? We met at a steakhouse downtown. James looked good, fit, energetic, passionate about his work in ways I remembered feeling once. He talked about GreenBuild's projects, their focus on affordable housing and environmental responsibility. What about you? He asked, how's retirement treating you? I could have said fine. Could have given him the standard retired person answer about keeping busy and enjoying free time. Instead, I heard myself say, I'm working on something. Want to see? We went back to my house. I took him down to the basement workshop, turned on my computer, and showed him everything. The designs, the research, the models, all of it. James didn't say anything for the first 5 minutes. He just scrolled through the files, zooming in on details, clicking through different views. Then he sat back and looked at me. Victor, he said slowly, do you understand what you have here? Modular housing designs. Nothing revolutionary. He laughed, but it wasn't a dismissive laugh. It was shocked, almost breathless. This isn't just modular housing. This is a complete rethinking of residential construction for the affordable market. The material efficiency alone could cut costs by 30%. The assembly timeline is half what conventional construction takes. And the designs, Victor, these are beautiful, genuinely beautiful. You haven't sacrificed aesthetics for efficiency. I designed homes for 43 years, I said. I know what makes a house feel like a home. James leaned forward. Can I show this to my partners at GreenBuild? What for? Because we've been looking for exactly this. We have the capital, the construction expertise, the market connections. What we don't have is a design system that works at scale without looking like institutional housing. This is it. This is what we need. I thought he was being polite, maybe a bit carried away with enthusiasm. I told him, sure, show whoever you want. I didn't expect anything to come of it. That was October 12th. By October 20th, I had a video call scheduled with GreenBuild's executive team. By November 1st, they'd flown me to Vancouver for in-person meetings. By November 15th, we were negotiating a partnership agreement. They wanted to license my designs. More than that, they wanted to hire me as chief design consultant for their affordable housing division. They wanted to build pilot projects using my modular system. They wanted my name attached to the project, the Kozlov housing system. They called it. The money they offered for the licensing deal was substantial, not lottery winner money, but enough to be life-changing, enough that assisted living would never be a financial concern, though that was now the furthest thing from my mind. But the money wasn't what made me say yes. It was the work, real work, meaningful work, work that would result in actual homes for actual families who needed them. I still didn't tell Derek and Linda. Part of me wanted to. Part of me wanted to call them immediately and say, Remember when you said I was working on things that don't matter? But another part of me, the part that had been hurt by their dismissal, wanted to wait, wanted to see their faces when they found out from someone else. The deal was finalized on December 3rd. GreenBuild issued a press release on December 5th. GreenBuild Solutions partners with renowned Calgary architect Victor Kozlov to revolutionize affordable housing. The story was picked up by CBC, the Calgary Herald, and several architecture and construction trade publications. My phone started ringing at 7 a.m. on December 6th. The first call was from Derek. Dad. His voice was strange, high and confused. Dad, are you awake? I am now, I said, though I'd actually been up for an hour, drinking coffee and reading emails from former colleagues congratulating me. Did you? There's an article. It says you. He couldn't seem to form a complete sentence. What article? The CBC article. About you and some housing company. Dad, it says you sold a modular housing design system. It says you're going to be chief design consultant. It says the licensing deal was worth. He stopped. Dad, is this real? It's real. Silence. Then why didn't you tell us? You didn't ask. Linda called 10 minutes later. Then Derek called again. Then Linda. Then my brother Paul from Toronto who'd seen the news. Then 3 former clients. Then 2 old colleagues. Then the president of the Alberta Association of Architects wanted to feature me in their newsletter. I let most of them go to voicemail. I wasn't ready yet. Not for their apologies or their sudden interest or their attempts to act like they'd always believed in me. Derek and Linda showed up at my house that evening. They let themselves in, they still had keys, and found me in the basement, working on modifications to one of the designs that GreenBuild had requested. Dad, Linda said from the doorway, we need to talk. I saved my work and turned around. They were both standing there looking uncomfortable, like children who've been caught doing something wrong. Why didn't you tell us? Derek asked again, about the project, about the meetings, about any of it? I looked at them. These 2 people I'd raised, who I loved, who I'd apparently failed to communicate with somewhere along the way. Would you have cared? Of course we would have cared. Linda said, you're our father. No, I said, you would have humored me. You would have nodded and said, that's nice, Dad, and then gone back to worrying about whether I was eating vegetables and making friends. You'd already decided that my working days were over, that anything I did in this basement was just sad old man activity, keeping busy while waiting to die. That's not fair, Derek said. Isn't it? You wanted me to sell this house and move into assisted living. You thought I was wasting my time down here. You never once asked what I was actually working on, because you never told us. Linda said, her voice breaking. You shut us out. After Mom died, you just disappeared into this basement and stopped letting us in. She was crying now. I felt the anger draining out of me, replaced by something more complicated. Sadness, maybe. Or just exhaustion from months of carrying the secret. You're right, I said. I did shut you out. But you'd already stopped seeing me as someone capable of doing meaningful work. You saw me as someone who needed to be managed, placed somewhere safe, kept from being too isolated or too eccentric. You looked at me and saw an old man who needed supervision, not an architect who still had ideas worth pursuing. Derek sat down on my workbench stool. Dad, I'm sorry. You're right. We did treat you like that. After Mom died, you seemed so lost. We were trying to help. I know, I said, but your version of helping was wrapping me in bubble wrap, making me smaller, safer, less complicated. And maybe I needed some of that for a while. But I also needed space to remember who I was beyond Catherine's husband, beyond your father. I needed to be Victor the architect again. And you are, Linda said, wiping her eyes. Dad, what you've built, what you've designed, the articles are calling it revolutionary. They're saying it could change how affordable housing is constructed across Canada. I don't know about all that, I said. I just designed some houses that make sense. That's what I've always done. We're proud of you, Derek said quietly. I need you to know that. We're incredibly proud. And I'm sorry we made you feel like you had to prove something to us. I wasn't trying to prove anything, I said. I was just trying to do work that mattered. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't entirely true. Some part of me had been proving something. To them, to myself, to everyone who thought 68 meant done. They stayed for dinner. We ordered pizza. Linda gave up on lecturing me about nutrition and talked, really talked, not the careful, surface-level conversations we've been having for 2 years. Tell us about the designs, Linda said. How did you come up with them? So I did. I told them about the original sketches from the 90s, about realizing the world had changed enough to make them viable, about teaching myself new software and researching new materials, about the night I'd shown James Morrison and watched his face light up with recognition of what I'd built. I worked on this for almost a year, I said. Every day, 8 to 10 hours a day sometimes. It was the only thing that made me feel alive after your mother died. Not golf, not travel, not senior centers or hobby classes. This, creating something real. Why didn't you tell us? Linda asked again, but softer this time. Because you'd already decided what my retirement should look like. I said, and it didn't include this. It included downsizing and simplifying and accepting that my productive years were over. And maybe for some people that's fine. That's what they want. But I wasn't done yet. I'm still not done. The media attention intensified over the next few weeks. CBC did a longer feature piece. An architecture podcast interviewed me. The Calgary Herald ran a full profile. Local architect retirement project could transform affordable housing. The article included a quote from James Morrison. Victor Kozlov has done what dozens of firms and think tanks have been trying to do for years. He's created a housing system that's simultaneously affordable, sustainable, beautiful, and scalable. And he did it alone in his basement, while everyone assumed he was just keeping busy in retirement. That quote got shared widely. It became a sort of mini viral moment in architecture and construction circles. The retired architect who revolutionized housing from his basement. People loved that story, but the attention was exhausting. I wasn't used to it, didn't particularly want it. I just wanted to work. GreenBuild scheduled the groundbreaking for the first pilot project, a 24-unit development in Surrey, British Columbia, for February. They wanted me there, wanted media coverage, wanted to make an event. Your family should come, James told me during a planning call. This is a big moment. I invited Derek and Linda. To my surprise, they both said yes immediately and made arrangements to fly to Vancouver. The week before the groundbreaking, I got an unexpected call from Michael Zhang, the junior architect, who'd worked for me before I closed my firm. I hadn't spoken to him in over a year. Mr. Kozlov, he said, I saw the news about your housing system. I had call and say, I'm sorry. Sorry for what? For leaving when I did. For not believing in the firm. For thinking you were just an old-school architect who couldn't adapt. He paused. What you created, it's brilliant. It's everything I wanted to work on but didn't think was possible in residential design. You were right to leave, I said. The firm was dying. I was dying in a way. I hadn't created anything genuinely new in years. But you did eventually, he said, after everyone left, after everyone stopped watching. That's when you did your best work. That observation stayed with me. He was right. Without clients to please, without a firm to maintain, without anyone's expectations to meet, I'd finally created something original, something mine. The groundbreaking in February was surreal. There were cameras, local politicians, speeches about innovation and affordable housing. They'd set up a display of my designs with explanatory placards about the modular system, the sustainable materials, the construction efficiency. Derek and Linda flew in with their families. My grandchildren, 3 of them, ages 6 to 14, were there wearing nice clothes and looking confused about why Grandpa was suddenly important enough for speeches and cameras. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it brief. I'm an architect, I said. For 43 years, I designed homes for families. Traditional homes, nice homes, but nothing revolutionary. When I retired, people assumed I was done. I assumed I was done. But it turns out retirement is just a word. It doesn't mean you stop thinking, stop creating, stop having ideas worth pursuing. I paused, looking at the rendering of the housing development behind me. These homes will be built using a system I designed in my basement, while my children worried I was isolated and depressed. And maybe I was isolated, maybe I was depressed, but I was also working. And sometimes those things can coexist: grief and creation, solitude and productivity, ending and beginning. The applause felt strange. I wasn't used to being celebrated. For most of my career, I'd worked in relative obscurity. Clients remember my name only as long as their house remained standing. This was different. This felt like legacy. After the ceremony, my granddaughter Emma, Derek's daughter, the 14-year-old, came up to me. "Grandpa," she said, "can I ask you something?" Of course. "Were you scared? When you were working on this by yourself, did you think people would care?" I thought about it. "Yes," I said. "I was terrified. Not that people wouldn't care, but that I was fooling myself. That it wasn't actually good, that I was just an old man unable to accept that his useful years were behind him." "But you kept working anyway?" I kept working anyway, because even if no one ever saw it, I needed to know I could still create something worth creating. And that turned out to be enough. She nodded thoughtfully. "I'm supposed to do a school project about someone I admire. Can I do it about you?" "I'd be honored," I said. That night, Derek, Linda, and I had dinner at a restaurant overlooking English Bay. The conversation was easier now, more natural. The barrier that had existed between us for 2 years had started to dissolve. "Dad," Derek said over dessert, "I need to apologize again. Properly this time." "You already apologized." "Not really. I apologize for underestimating you. But I need to apologize for something bigger." He set down his fork. "I stopped seeing you as a person with your own interior life. After Mom died, you became a problem to solve. Someone who needed management. I forgot you were still you. Still thinking. Still dreaming. Still wanting things." Linda added, "We treated you like you were in the final chapter of your life. Like all that was left was maintenance and decline. We didn't realize you were starting a new chapter." I wasn't sure I admitted. Most days I thought I was just keeping myself busy, avoiding grief by staying in the basement. It wasn't until James saw the designs that I realized I'd actually built something real. "But you kept working even when you thought it was meaningless," Linda said. "That's the part one can't stop thinking about. You didn't need external validation to keep creating." "I needed something to do with my hands and my mind," I said. "Catherine and I used to talk about everything. My projects, her work at the library, politics, neighbors, stupid things, important things. After she died, there was just silence. The basement was the only place where that silence felt productive instead of suffocating." "The project are going well," James told me in March. "Better than well. We got municipalities in Ontario and Nova Scotia asking about the Kozloff system. 3 private developers want to license it. We're getting calls from housing advocacy groups, from environmental organizations, from architecture schools wanting to study the methodology." "How many units are we talking about?" I asked. "If everything moves forward as planned," James pulled out his tablet and showed me projections. "In 5 years, we could have 2,000 to 3,000 homes built using your system. Families who couldn't otherwise afford home ownership, living in well-designed, sustainable houses that don't look like cheap housing." I stared at the numbers. 2,000 to 3,000 homes. More than I designed in my entire career. Not custom homes for wealthy clients, but affordable homes for people who needed them. "Victor," James said, "you spent 43 years designing one house at a time. Now you designed a system that could house thousands of families. You've multiplied your impact by orders of magnitude." "I never thought of it that way," I said. "Well, start thinking of it that way, because that's what you've done." The University of Calgary School of Architecture reached out in April asking if I'd give a guest lecture. I hadn't been in an academic setting in decades, and I wasn't sure I had anything relevant to say to students. But I agreed. The lecture hall was packed, not just architecture students, but engineering students, urban planning students, even some from the business school interested in sustainable development. I titled the lecture Late Career Innovation, Creating After Everyone Stops Watching. "I'm 68, I began. By conventional wisdom, I should be playing golf and complaining about young people. Instead, I'm consulting on the largest affordable housing project I've ever been associated with. I want to talk about why that happened and what it means for those of you starting your careers. I told them about the original designs from the 90s, about setting them aside because the industry wasn't ready, about picking them back up 30 years later and discovering the world had changed enough to make them viable. But mostly I talk about failure, about the invisible middle years of a career where you do competent work that no one remembers, about closing my firm, retiring with accomplishments but no legacy, about my children suggesting assisted living because they thought I was wasting away in isolation. The innovation didn't come from wisdom or experience. I said, it came from having nothing left to lose. When you're 68 and widowed and retired, and your children think you're depressed, there's a certain freedom in that. No one is watching. No one cares. So you might as well work on something that actually interests you, even if it goes nowhere. A student raised her hand, but it did go somewhere. How did you know it would? I didn't, I said. That's the point. I worked on it for almost a year before showing anyone. For all I knew, it was garbage. But I worked on it anyway because I needed something to care about. The commercial success was a bonus. The real success was remembering I was still capable of creating. Another student asked, what would you tell your younger self? I thought about it. I'd tell him that the most important work might come late, that the ideas you have at 35 might not find their moment until you're 65. That experience isn't about doing the same thing better. It's about finally understanding what was always wrong with how things were done and having the courage to reimagine them. The lecture got recorded and posted online. It ended up being viewed tens of thousands of times. Architecture students shared it. Career counselors shared it. People going through midlife career changes shared it. I got emails from people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, telling me they'd started projects they'd set aside decades ago. Engineers working on inventions they'd never had time for. Artists creating work they convinced themselves was too late to matter. Teachers developing curriculum innovations their schools had previously rejected. Your story gave me permission, one email said. Permission to believe my late career ideas might actually be valuable. By summer, I'd moved to Vancouver part-time to be closer to GreenBuild's offices. I kept my Calgary house. Derek and Linda's concern about the big empty house had turned out to be unfounded, but I rented a small apartment in Vancouver for the weeks I needed to be on site. The first pilot development in Surrey was completed in August. 24 families moved into homes built using the Kozloff system. GreenBuild organized a ribbon-cutting ceremony and invited the families to attend. I met them, young couples, single parents, immigrant families, people working 2 jobs to afford housing in one of Canada's most expensive markets. They walked through their new homes with expressions I recognized from my decades designing residential projects. That particular joy of seeing a space that's yours, that fits your life, that you can afford. A woman named Priya approached me afterward. She was maybe 30 with 2 small children. Mr. Kozlov. She said, I just wanted to thank you. You don't need to thank me. I just drew some plans. No, she insisted. We've been renting a 1-bedroom apartment for 6 years, saving everything we could. We'd given up on ever owning a home. These houses, she gestured around, they're beautiful and we can actually afford them. You gave us something we thought was impossible. Her husband added, our parents came to Canada for opportunity. They worked so hard, and we were starting to think we'd never have what they dreamed for us. But now we do, because you designed something that works for people like us. I didn't know what to say. I'd spent my career designing homes for people who could afford custom architecture. This was different. This was homes for people who needed them, not people who wanted showcases. That's what I should have been doing all along, I realized. Not designing monuments to wealth, but designing systems that made housing accessible. Derek visited me in Vancouver in September. Just him, no Linda, no agenda. He wanted to see the Surrey development in person. We walked through the neighborhood together. The families had been there a month, and you could already see the community forming. Kids playing the shared green spaces I designed into the site plan, neighbors talking across fences. Someone's garden starting to flourish. This is incredible, Dad, Derek said. Not just the houses, but the community. You design for how people actually live. I tried to, I said. That was always the goal. Houses aren't just structures. They're frameworks for lives. He stopped walking and looked at me. "I need to tell you something. When Mom died, I thought you died too in a way. Not physically, but the dad I knew, he seemed gone. You were just going through motions, existing but not living, and it scared me. So I tried to control it, try to manage you into some version of okay that I could understand. But you were working through grief the only way you knew how." He continued, "By creating. And I couldn't see that because I decided what your grief should look like, what your retirement should look like, what your old age should look like. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry I tried to shrink your life down to something manageable instead of letting it be messy and complicated and creative. I forgive you," I said, "and I'm sorry I shut you out. You were right that I was isolated. I just needed the isolation to be on my terms, not because someone decided that's all I was capable of anymore." We walked back to the car in comfortable silence. As we drove away from the development, Derek said, "You know what's funny? We were worried you'd waste away in that basement. Turns out that basement is where you did your best work." "Maybe it's both," I said. "Maybe I was wasting away and doing my best work. Maybe those things aren't mutually exclusive." By October, GreenBuild had 3 more developments in progress. One in Ottawa, one in Halifax, one in Winnipeg. The Kozlov system had been featured in architectural journals, housing policy reports, and even a documentary about innovative solutions to the affordable housing crisis. But the part that mattered most to me was the work itself. I was designing again, really designing. Not just variations on a modular system, but custom elements for each development. Thinking about how the spaces would be used, how families would move through them, how communities would form around them. At 68, I was busier than I'd been at 48. I had purpose. I had projects that mattered. I had finally figured out what I've been trying to say as an architect for 43 years, that everyone deserves beautiful, functional space, not just people who can afford custom design. Linda called in November. "Dad," she said, "I was thinking about something. When we suggested assisted living, we thought we were helping you prepare for decline. But you weren't declining. You were transforming. I like that better than late career reinvention." I said, "That's what it was, though. You transformed from a traditional residential architect into someone who's changing how an entire industry thinks about affordable housing. And you did it at an age when most people have stopped trying to transform anything." "I got lucky," I said. "Right timing, right idea, right person seen the value in it." "No," Linda said firmly. "You worked your ass off on something you believed in when no one was watching, and no one would blame you for just giving up. That's not luck. That's courage." On December 5th, exactly 1 year after the GreenBuild press release, I was back in Calgary for a family dinner. Derek and Linda and their families, my brother Paul who'd flown in from Toronto, some old friends and colleagues. Someone made a toast to Victor, who proved that 68 is just getting started. Everyone raised their glasses. I looked around the table at these people I loved, who loved me, who'd hurt me and been hurt by me and forgiven me and been forgiven, who'd stopped seeing me clearly and then learned to see me again. "I want to say something," I said. "This year has been extraordinary. The housing system, the partnership with GreenBuild, the media attention, all of it. But that's not what I'm grateful for." I paused, making sure I had the words right. "I'm grateful that I remembered who I was. For a few years after Catherine died, I forgot. I became just a grief, just a loss, just the old man everyone worried about. And then I started working on those designs, and slowly I remembered, I'm Victor Kozlov. I'm an architect. I create spaces for people to live in. That's who I am. And that doesn't stop just because I'm 68 or widowed or retired." I looked at Derek and Linda. "You too tried to protect me by making my life smaller, and I resented that. But I also understand it. You were scared of losing me the way we lost Mom, so you tried to wrap me up somewhere safe. But safety isn't always what someone needs. Sometimes what they need is space to become whoever they're supposed to be next." Derek raised his glass. "To figuring out who we're supposed to be next. At any age." We drank to that. Later that night, after everyone had left and I was back in my house, my big, supposedly too large house that I had no intention of leaving, I went down to the basement workshop. The space looked different now. More organized, more professional. I'd upgraded my equipment, bought better software, created a proper drafting station. It wasn't a sad man's refuge anymore. It was a working architect studio. I pulled up the file for a new project GreenBuild wanted me to consult on. A 40-unit development in medicine had designed for seniors aging in community. The irony wasn't lost on me. A year ago, my children wanted me in assisted living. Now I was designing age-friendly housing that kept seniors in independent, connected communities. I started sketching ideas. Not modular units this time, but custom spaces that understood what aging actually meant. Not dependence, but changing needs. Not isolation, but chosen community. Not giving up on life, but adapting to new phases of it. At 68, I was finally designing with the wisdom that came from living. Not just technical knowledge, but understanding what it meant to age, to grieve, to transform, to refuse, to become invisible. The work wasn't easier now that people were watching. In some ways, it was harder. There were expectations now, pressure to replicate the success of the Kozlov system. But there was also freedom in having proved something, not to my children or James Morrison or the architecture community, but to myself. I'd proved I wasn't done, that my best ideas might still be ahead of me. That 68 was not an ending, but a beginning of something I hadn't expected. My phone buzzed. An email from Michael Zhang, the former junior architect. He'd been offered a position with GreenBuild and wanted to know if I'd be willing to work with him again, to mentor him on affordable housing design. I smiled and typed back, I'd be honored. Let's build something that matters. At 68, I was building more than houses. I was building a legacy, not the kind measured in awards or recognition, but in families who'd have homes they could afford, in communities designed with intention, in young architects who'd learned that innovation doesn't have an expiration date. Catherine would have loved this. She'd always said I was at my best when I was creating, when I was fully engaged with work that challenged me. She'd worried in those last months about what I'd do without her, without the firm, without the structure that had defined my adult life. I wish I could tell her. I figured it out. It took a while, and I did it messily, and I hurt our children by shutting them out. But I figured out how to be Victor Kozlov after all the things that made me Victor Kozlov had fallen away. The answer, it turned out, was simple. I just kept being an architect. Not because someone was paying me, or because I had a firm to run, or because it was my job, but because it was who I was, who I'd always been, who I'd always be until the day I died. And dying, whenever that came, wouldn't be the end of what I'd built. The houses would remain. The families would remain. The system I created would keep producing homes long after I was gone. That was legacy, not fame, not recognition, not even the money. Legacy was creating something that outlived you and made the world. I closed my laptop and looked around the basement workshop. This room where my children had thought I was wasting away. This room where I'd actually been building the most important work of my career. The thing about getting older is that everyone assumes you're moving toward an end. And you are, of course. We all are. But that doesn't mean you're not also moving toward beginning. Sometimes the most important beginnings come late, when you finally live enough to know what actually matters. At 68, I'd learned what mattered. Creating spaces where families could build lives. Not showcasing my brilliance. Not chasing awards. Not designing monuments to wealth. Just making it possible for more people to have the simple, profound gift of a home they could afford and be proud of. My phone rang. James Morrison. Victor, he said, I'm sending you something. Check your email in about 5 minutes. What is it? Just look. I hung up and waited. The email came through, a video file labeled Priya's Family 6-month follow-up. I clicked play. It was a woman from the Surrey ribbon cutting, the one who thanked me with tears in her eyes. She was standing in her kitchen, my kitchen, designed with my specifications, and she was cooking while her children did homework at the table I'd made sure had space for Mr. Kozlov. She said to the camera, "It's been 6 months since we moved in. I wanted you to see what your design has given us. My kids have their own rooms for the first time. My husband has space for his woodworking. I have a kitchen where I can cook the recipes my mother taught me. We have a home, A real home. Thank you for making that possible. The video ended. I sat in my basement workshop with tears running down my face. Not sad tears, grateful tears, purposeful tears. This was why I became an architect 45 years ago. Not to design expensive custom homes, though I'd done that well enough, but to create spaces where people could live the lives they wanted to live. I'd just forgotten that for a few decades, lost it somewhere in the business of running a firm and meeting client expectations and paying mortgages. It took losing everything, my firm, my wife, my sense of purpose, nearly my relationship with my children, to remember what I'd known at 23 when I'd first decided to become an architect. That good design should serve everyone, not just the wealthy. At 68, I'd finally become the architect I'd always meant to be. I forwarded the video to Derek and Linda with a simple message. This is why I spent all that time in the basement. Linda replied within minutes. I understand now, Dad. I'm sorry it took me so long. Derek's reply came a moment later. That's beautiful, Dad. Mom would be so proud. He was right. Catherine would be proud, not just of the houses or the system or the recognition. She'd be proud that I'd found my way back to myself, that I'd refused to accept that 68 meant obsolete, that I'd kept creating even when no one was watching, even when it would have been easier to give up. The next morning, I woke up with a new design idea, not for affordable housing this time, but for a community center that could anchor one of the GreenBuild developments, a space where families could gather, where children could play, where neighbors could become friends. I went down to my basement workshop and started sketching. My hands moved across the tablet with the same certainty they did 40 years ago, when I was young and convinced I'd change the world with architecture. I hadn't changed the world then. I'd been too focused on building a career, on doing what was expected, on playing it safe. But maybe I was changing a small piece of it now, not the whole world. Just a world for a few thousand families who needed homes they could afford. That was enough. That was more than enough. At 68, I was just getting started. And this time, I was doing it right.